European Americans are Americans with ancestry from Europe. The Spanish were the first Europeans to establish a continuous presence in what is now the United States. Marta N. Diaga I Cortales, born 1566, San Augusta N., La Florida, was the first known person of European descent born in what is now the United States. 21 years later, Virginia Dare, born in 1587 on Roanoke Island in present-day North Carolina, was the first child born in the 13 colonies to English parents. In 2009, German Americans, Irish Americans, English Americans and Italian Americans were the four largest self-reported European ancestry groups in the United States, forming 43.9% of the total population. However, the English Americans and British Americans demography is considered a serious undercount, as the stock tend to self-report and identify as simply Americans due to the length of time they have inhabited America. Subsequently, they consider themselves indigenous. European Americans do not self-identify as such, and are not recognized as a group by the United States Census Bureau on their own, but are included in the category of white. White is defined by the United States Census Bureau as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. The white category of Americans had the second lowest poverty rate, the second highest educational attainment levels, the third highest median household income, behind Pacific Islands Americans and Asian Americans, and the second highest median personal income among the racial demographics in the United States, placing them behind Asian Americans in all categories. Terminology, use. In 1995, as part of a review of the Office of Management and Budget's Statistical Policy Directive No. 15, a survey was conducted of census recipients to determine their preferred terminology for the racial ethnic groups defined in the directive. For the white group, European American came third, preferred by 2.35% of panel interviewees. The term European American is not in popular use in the U.S. among the general public or in the mass media, and the terms white, or white American are commonly used instead. The term is used interchangeably with Caucasian American, White American, and Anglo-American in many places around the United States. Anglo-American derives from the English-speaking British colonists descended from the Angles tribes but refers to all English-speaking white Americans / while European-descended Americans who have ancestors that spoke Spanish. It is used in the southwestern United States in place of white, or European American. European American also has a more specific reference than either white American, or Caucasian American, since both of these terms include a larger group of people than what is acknowledged in Europe. Also, whereas the terms white American and Caucasian American carry somewhat ambiguous definitions, depending on the speaker, European American has a more specific definition and scope. According to linguist Janet Bing, the term European American has increased a little in use, especially among scholars. Origin. The term was coined by some to emphasize the European cultural and geographical ancestral origins of Americans in the same way that is done for African Americans and Asian Americans. A European American awareness is still notable because 90% of the respondents classified as white on the U.S. Census knew their European ancestry. Historically, the concept of an American was conceived in the U.S. as a person of European ancestry to the exclusion of African Americans and Native Americans. As a linguistic concern, the term is often meant to discourage a dichotomous view of the racial landscape between the normative white category and everyone else. Margot Adair suggests that the recognition of specific European American ancestries allows certain Americans to become aware that they come from a variety of different cultures. History. Since 1607, some 57 million immigrants have come to the United States from other lands. Approximately 10 million passed through on their way to some other place or returned to their original homelands, leaving a net gain of some 47 million people. Prior to 1960, the overwhelming majority came from Europe or European descent from Canada. In 1960, for example, 75.0% of foreign-born population in the U.S. came from the region of Europe. Before 1881, the vast majority of immigrants, almost 86% of the total, arrived from Northwest Europe, principally Great Britain, Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. The years between 1881 and 1893 the pattern shifted, in the sources of U.S. A Euro new immigration a Euro. Between 1894 and 1914, immigrants from southern, central, and eastern Europe accounted for 69% of the total. European Americans are largely descended from colonial American stock supplemented by two sizable waves of immigration from Europe. Approximately 53% of European Americans today are of colonial ancestry, and 47% are descended from European, Canadian, or Mexican immigrants who have come to the U.S. since 1790. Today, each of the three different branches of immigrants are most common in different parts of the country. Colonial stock, which mostly consists of people of English, Scottish, Scots-Irish or Welsh descent, may be found throughout the country but is especially dominant in the South. Some people of colonial stock, especially in the mid-Atlantic states, are also of Dutch, German and Flemish descent. The vast majority of these are Protestants. The Pennsylvania Dutch population gave the state of Pennsylvania a high German cultural character. French descent, which can also be found throughout the country, is most concentrated in Louisiana, while Spanish descent is dominant in the Southwest and Florida. These are primarily Roman Catholic and were assimilated with the Louisiana Purchase and the aftermath of the Mexican-American War and Adams-Oona Treaty, respectively. The first large wave of European migration after the Revolutionary War came from northern and central Western Europe between about 1820 and 1890. Most of these immigrants were from Ireland, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and Britain, and with large numbers of Irish and German Catholics immigrating, Roman Catholicism became an important minority religion. Polish Americans usually used to come as German or Austrian citizens, since Poland lost its independence in the period between 1772 and 1795. Descendants of the first wave are dominant in the Midwest and West, although German descent is extremely common in Pennsylvania, and Irish descent is also common in urban centers in the Northeast. The Irish and Germans held on to their ethnic identity throughout the 19th and early half of the 20th centuries, as well as other European ethnic groups. Most people of Polish origin live in the Northeast and the Midwest. Second wave. The second wave of European Americans arrived from the mid-1890s to the 1920s, mainly from southern, central and eastern Europe, as well as Ireland. This wave included Irish, Italians, Greeks, Hungarians, Portuguese, Ukrainians, Russians, Poles and other Slavs. With large numbers of immigrants from Spain, Mexico, Spanish Caribbean, and South and Central America, white Hispanics have increased to 8% of the U.S. population, and Texas, California, New York, and Florida are important centers for them. Demographics. At the 2010 census there were 223,553,265 white Americans, which includes 26.7 million white Hispanic and Latino Americans. That is, there are 196.8 million non-Hispanic whites, and 26,735,713 white Hispanic and Latino Americans. Non-Hispanic whites together with white Hispanic and Latino Americans form the census category of white Americans. See race and ethnicity. The numbers below give numbers of European Americans as measured by the U.S. Census in 1980, 1990, and 2000. The numbers are measured according to declarations in census responses. This leads to uncertainty over the real meaning of the figures. For instance, as can be seen, according to these figures, the European American population dropped 40 million in 10 years, but in fact this is a reflection of changing census responses. In particular, it reflects the increased popularity of the American option following its inclusion as an example in the 2000 census forms. It is important to note that breakdowns of the European American population into subcomponents is a difficult and rather arbitrary exercise. Farley argues that, because of ethnic intermarriage, the numerous generations that separate respondents from their forebears and the apparent unimportance to many whites of European origin, responses appear quite inconsistent. In particular, A large majority of European Americans have ancestry from a number of different countries, and the response to a single ancestry gives little indication of the backgrounds of Americans today. When only prompted for a single response, the examples given on the census forms and a pride in identifying the more distinctive parts of one's heritage are important factors. These will likely adversely affect the numbers reporting ancestries from the British Isles. Multiple response ancestry data often greatly increase the numbers reporting for the main ancestry groups, although Farley goes as far to conclude that no simple question will distinguish those who identify strongly with a specific European group from those who report symbolic or imagined ethnicity. He highlights responses in the current population survey where for the main old ancestry groups, over 40% change their reported ancestry over the 6-month period between survey waves. An important example to note is that in 1980 23.75 million Americans claimed English ancestry and 25.85 claimed English ancestry together with one or more other. This represents 49.6 million people. The table below shows that in 1990, when only single and primary responses were allowed, this fell to 32 million, and in 2000 to 24 million. The largest self-reported ancestries in 2000, reporting over 5 million members, were in order: German, Irish, English, American, Italian, French, and Polish. They have different distributions within the United States. In general, the northern half of the United States from Pennsylvania westward is dominated by German ancestry, and the southern half by English and American. Irish may be found throughout the entire country. Italian ancestry is most common in the Northeast, Polish in the Great Lakes region, and French in New England and Louisiana. U.S. Census Bureau statisticians estimate that approximately 62% of European Americans today are either wholly or partly of English, Welsh, Irish, or Scottish ancestry. Approximately 86% of European Americans today are of Northwestern and Central European ancestry, and 14% are of Southeastern European and White Hispanic and Latino American descent. Culture. For the most part, European American cultural lineage can be traced back to Western and Northern Europe and is institutionalized in the government, traditions, and civic education in the U.S. The Solar Trayon hypothesis suggested that Europeans may have been among the first in the Americas. More recent research has argued this not to be the case and that the founding Native American population came from Siberia through Beringia. An article in the American Journal of Human Genetics states here we show, by using 86 complete mitochondrial genomes, that all Native American haplogroups, including haplogroup X, were part of a single founding population, thereby refuting multiple migration models. Since most later European Americans have assimilated into American culture, most European Americans now generally express their individual ethnic ties sporadically and symbolically and do not consider their specific ethnic origins to be essential to their identity. However, European American ethnic expression has been revived since the 1960s. Southern Europeans, specifically Italian and Greeks, have maintained high levels of ethnic identity. Same applied to Polish Americans. In the 1960s, Mexican Americans, Jewish Americans, and African Americans started exploring their cultural traditions as the ideal of cultural pluralism took hold. European Americans followed suit by exploring their individual cultural origins and having less shame of expressing their unique cultural heritage. European Ancestries Table. See also: Emigration from Europe, American Chamber of Commerce to the European Union, Anglo, ethnic groups in Europe, hyphenated American, immigration to the United States, melting pot, people of the United States, white American, notes, Jewish Americans, particularly those of Ashkenazi and Sephardi descent, are a diaspora population with origins in southwestern Asia, but are often classified as white rather than Asian. In addition, all of the original peoples of the Middle East are classified as white by the U.S. Census Bureau. Gypsy Americans are a diaspora group with origins in the Indian subcontinent, but are sometimes classified as European. Armenia is physiographically entirely in Western Asia, but it has strong historical and socio-political connections with Europe. The population and area figures include the entire state respectively. Azerbaijan is often considered a transcontinental country in the Caucasus and Western Asia. However, the population and area figures are for the entire state. This includes the exclave of Nakhchivan and the region Nagorno-Karabakh that has declared, and de facto achieved, independence. Nevertheless, it is not recognized de jure by sovereign states. Georgia is often considered a transcontinental country in the Caucasus and Western Asia. It is placed in Europe by numerous European and international organizations. Turkey is physiographically considered a transcontinental country in Western Asia and Southeastern Europe. However, the population and area figures include the entire state, both the 5% European and 95% Asian portions. The 1980 census had 188,302,438 people report at least one specific ancestry out of the then total 226,545,805 United States population. Numbers in percents by ancestry group do not add to totals because persons reporting a multiple ancestry are included in more than one group. Responses of total were single ancestry 63% and multiple ancestry 37%. See 1980 U.S. Census for details. American ethnicity 12,395,999. 20,188,305. Mostly of English, Scottish, Scotch-Irish and or Welsh ancestry that they cannot trace, given its predominance in the Upper South. Also, two-thirds of white Americans have two or more different European nationalities, often four or more, and many American respondents may be cases where the person does not think any one ancestry is dominant enough to identify with. White Hispanic and Latino Americans 16,907,852 or 48% identified themselves as white of the then total Hispanic population. Presidents of European descent. Most of the heritage that all 44 U.S. presidents come from, is British ancestry. Others include John F. Kennedy of Irish descent, Martin van Buren of Dutch descent and two presidents whose fathers were of German descent, Dwight D. Eisenhower and Herbert Hoover. Later U.S. presidents' ancestry can often be traced to ancestors from multiple nations in Europe. Admixture, in a recent study, Goerner section Alves al. 2007 reported sub-Saharan and Amerindian mtDNA lineages at a frequency of 3.1% in white North Americans of European descent. Based on a study of U.S. Census Bureau figures from 1980, 1990, and 2000, Census Bureau statisticians determined that 1 out of 3 European Americans is descended from only one European ethnicity. 1 out of 3 is descended from 2 European nationalities. And 1 out of 3 is descended from 3 or more European ethnic origins. Another study, Lau al. 2010 was done on a total of 664 Americans, among them, 246 were self-declared U.S. African Americans, 127 were self-declared U.S. Hispanic Americans, and 245 were self-declared U.S. European Americans from Temple and Killeen, Texas, Louisville, Kentucky, Baltimore, Maryland, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Memphis, Tennessee and Miami, Florida, and 46 were self-declared U.S. Asian Americans from the Fairfield, Ohio source. Self-declared U.S. Europeans showed on average 93.2% of European ancestry. References